My name is Hattie, and my landmark or site presentation about Brazil is on the Iguaçu Falls. The Iguaçu Falls in Portuguese are known as the Cataratas do Iguaçu, and in Spanish, Cataratas del Iguaçu. Next, a little bit about my infographic and flyer. I know the original plan was to pass these around class as we gave our presentations, but I thought that this would be sufficient to just include them. I'm a really big fan of National Geographic, so for my flyer, I called it National Topographic and included some fun facts on the other page. Then I think that whenever we learn about a new place, whether that's a country or a historic site, that it's important to be able to contextualize maybe where it's located. And the Iguaçu Falls, it actually falls in between two countries, Brazil and Argentina. And it looks like it actually maybe is on the border of Paraguay, but actually it's not. It's just in between these two countries, and it's near Paraguay. In addition to that, in Brazil, it's located in the western state of Paraná, and in Argentina, it's located in the Misiones province. In addition, talking about its geography, these falls are actually in a semicircle foundation, and they're actually also formed kind of in a J shape that's around 1.7 miles. And at the top of them, there's something called the Garganta do Diablo, which is called the throat of the devil, or the devil's throat, and that kind of just leads the formation for what these falls look like. Then a little bit about the Iguaçu River. This river is important because it actually connects to the falls, and part of its name of the falls actually comes from the name of the river. This river is important as far as transportation, as well as supporting biodiversity, such as different species of fish. And this river spans both Brazil and Argentina. You can't quite see it on the map, but it does cross into Argentina. And then also the river, it tends to vary significantly depending on the season. And as I mentioned, it connects to the Iguaçu Falls, but it also connects to the Paraná River. From there, a little bit of background and historical information. So the name Iguaçu comes from the Guarani or Tupi words meaning water and big. So Guarani, that's an indigenous language and an indigenous group. And actually the preface E, or in Iguaçu, that part means water, and Wasu means big or great. So kind of altogether, kind of this big, great water. Talking a little bit about its historical formation, there's actually a Brazilian legend about it. And legend has it that there was this very strong deity, and long ago he wanted to marry this beautiful woman, and her name was Naipe. However, Naipe was in love with this man who was immortal, and so she and her mortal lover, they fled with a canoe, and as they're fleeing with the canoe, the deity, he became very angry, and he kind of struck down on the river, and essentially then formed these waterfalls and condemned the woman and her mortal lover to fall eternally. Outside of this legend, I also read a little bit about when it was first discovered. Now, I don't think that's the greatest word for this, especially since the name of this particular waterfall even comes from an indigenous word. And so in my presentation, I'm noting that the first European to record or have any record of contact with the falls occurred in 1541. And this record of contact, it occurred through Conquistador Alvar Núñez Cabeza de Vaca and his party. They basically mentioned that these falls, they're beautiful, they're huge, and they present a big obstacle towards trying to cross. Outside of that, the Iguaçu Falls were also added to the UNESCO Natural World Heritage Site, and they were added to this list around 1984. Their being added to the list is quite important because it allows more tourists to be able to visit. It recognizes the beauty of Brazil and Argentina and the waterfalls, and then it also allows for more preservation of this unique historical site. From there, talking about the Iguaçu Falls today, the Iguaçu Falls are comprised of over 275 waterfalls. They are also known as cataracts. As I mentioned, the Devil's Throat waterfall is actually the largest, and it is 80 meters in height, And actually, one thing that I found to be quite interesting is that at the base of that particular waterfall, in the water mist can move up to an upwards of 500 feet. So if you're standing underneath there, that is a lot of mist. Beyond that, the Iguaçu Falls also contain three main layers of basalt, and according to some scientists, these waterfalls were formed through volcanic eruption in the past. Also, the Iguaçu Falls has the sixth greatest average annual water flow, and that's in comparison to other waterfall systems. As I mentioned, Iguaçu Falls, they're the largest waterfall system in South America, and currently about 450,000 cubic feet of water fall per second over the Iguaçu Falls. And then finally, the Iguaçu Falls span an area of 2.7 kilometers. There's multiple waterfalls, so they don't actually generally qualify as being the largest waterfall in the world, but they are considered one of the largest waterfall systems. Beyond that, addressing tourism, every year more than 1 million tourists visit the Iguaçu Falls. And I was interested in what tourism looked like, so I actually went ahead and I visited the Brazilian website to see what it's like to maybe buy a ticket. And I met this large pop-up box, which I am including on the right in orange, that it's in Portuguese, so I can't quite read it, but I looked it up on Google Translate, and it sounds that the national park is closed until further notice because of the coronavirus. And so I'm not sure if on the Argentinian side, if they still have it closed, but I'm guessing that they probably do. One key priority for the conservation of the falls is managing tourists, because this is a very important area for biodiversity. Continuing a little bit more on tourism, another interesting thing is that multiple tourists, they come to visit because there are multiple activities beyond just visiting the falls. So individuals can engage in hiking, they might go bird watching. Individuals also are drawn to these particular falls because of animal biodiversity and animal sanctuaries. Also, there are boat tours. Again, as I mentioned, I tried to look at how much it costs to visit the parks, and according to different websites, it costs about $14 to visit the Iguaçu Falls on the Brazil side, and it costs about $13 in United States dollars to visit the Iguaçu Falls on the Argentinian side. However, if you want to visit both sides, you're going to need visas for both countries, so they recommend that you bring a passport, and you can spend actually up to 2 days on each side. Beyond that, as I mentioned, wildlife is really important, and both the Iguaçu River and the Iguaçu Falls are surrounded by what is known as the Atlantic Forest, and one of its key priorities is that they are going to protect threatened global species. And some of the species that are located within this forest and sustained by the waterfall include different jaguars, ocelots, anteaters, the harpy eagle, other birds like dusky swift and large toucans. And then within the water, specifically within the waterfall and the river, you can find endangered species like the golden salmon. And beyond that, there are 2,000 plant species within the forest, and that includes over 80 tree species and 400 bird species. Unfortunately, though, for both the waterfall as well as all of the animal species and plant species that live around it, there currently are quite a few threats that it's really important to mitigate. We have heavy tourism of the individuals who come to visit the waterfalls, but also in this area, there's heavy logging. Across Brazil, there's industrial and small-scale agriculture that is cutting down rainforests. Also, there are rural establishments and settlements. And then there's also hydroelectric development. And I included this image of what's called Iguaçu Dam. And this Iguaçu Dam is about 12 kilometers away from one of the waterfalls. And this hydroelectric development presents problems towards all of the animal species who live in this area. Finally, I just have a few interesting facts. I read that reportedly United States First Lady Eleanor Roosevelt once visited the falls, and when she was there, she exclaimed, "Poor Niagara," because actually the Iguaçu Falls are quite a bit larger than the Niagara Falls. The Niagara Falls are only about 51 meters in height, whereas the Iguaçu Falls are 64 to 82 meters in height. And also, the Iguaçu Falls are twice or three times as wide as the Niagara Falls. Also, about 2/3 of the Iguaçu Falls falls on the Argentinian side, and so you might not see as much just visiting it from the Brazilian side. And then finally, the Iguaçu Falls, they're kind of interesting to visit, especially if you're into motion pictures, because movies including Indiana Jones and The Kingdom of the Crystal Skull actually feature scenes at the Iguaçu Falls. All right, so that is my entire presentation. Thank you for taking the time to listen, and I hope that in the future you plan to visit the Iguaçu Falls.